Did you know that India's toughest exam has roots in British rule? But how did it evolve into the UPSC that we know today? Imagine an exam so tough that less than 1% of the candidates make it through. An exam that has shaped the leaders and administrators of India for decades. But what if I told you this exam wasn't even meant for Indians in the first place? What if I told you that this exam once meant only for the British elite? Was never designed for Indians. Once back then, our own leaders had to fight for the right to even appear for it. The history of UPSC is not just about an exam, it's about the story of power, colonial rule, and the struggle for an equal opportunity from the British Raj to independent India. Civil services have shaped our nation's destiny. But how did the British establish this system? When did Indians gain entry? And how did UPSC transform into the toughest exam in India? This is the untold history of UPSC, its origin, evolution, and how it became the gateway to the India's future. So let's dive in. So how did it all begin? Our story begins in the early 1800s, when India was under the control of British East India Company. The British needed administrators to govern their vast Indian territories. But who would do the job? At first, most administrative positions were given to British officials. They set up a system where only Englishmen could enter the civil services, ensuring that power remained in their hands. The introduction of a formal civil services exam. This happened by the year 1854, when Macaulay's reforms took place. In 1854, a major reform changed everything. A British official named Lord Macaulay introduced a structured civil service examination. This exam would select the best candidates, but there was one catch. The exam was only conducted in London. This meant that most Indians couldn't even think of applying. Travel was expensive, and the system was designed to keep out Indians. Despite all these challenges, some Indians didn't give up. In 1863, Satyendranath Tagore became the first Indian to crack the British Civil Service exam. This success proved that Indians could compete at the highest level. But one success story wasn't enough. Indian leaders demanded fairness. Why should Indians have to go to London to take an exam for ruling their own land? For this, leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and Surendranath Banerjee started pushing for reforms. And this has happened late into the 1800s and in between early 1900s. They wanted civil service exam to be conducted in India so that more Indians could join the administration. However, like any other usual demands, the British resisted. But by the early 1900s, they had no choice but to make changes. Finally, in 1922, the civil service exam was held in India for the first time in cities like Delhi and Allahabad. The year of 1926 is the year when, under the pressure from the Indian leaders, the British created the Public Service Commission, the first step towards a structured civil service system of India. But even discrimination continued. British officers still held the topmost positions, and Indians faced barriers at every step. It wasn't until the Government of India Act 1935 that Indians started gaining more control over civil services. This act laid the groundwork for what would later become UPSC after independence. From being a tool of British control to becoming the backbone of Indian democracy, the civil services underwent a massive transformation. But the real change came after independence, when India finally established its own Union Public Service Commission. So, with India's independence came the need for administrative reforms. August 15, 1947, India was finally free. But with independence came an urgent question: how would a newly independent India run its government? For nearly 200 years, the British controlled India's administration through the Indian Civil Services. But now, it was time to build our own system, one that reflects the value of a democratic India. Our leaders, including Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Sardar Patel, and Jawaharlal Nehru, knew that India needed an independent, efficient, corruption-free bureaucracy. That's why, as the constitution was being written, a new plan for civil services was also being formed. And then later towards that, the answer came in the form of Article 315 of the Indian Constitution. On January 26, 1950, the Union Public Service Commission was officially established. UPSC was given the authority to conduct examinations, recruit officers, and ensure that India's administration ran on merit, not favoritism. It was a complete shift from the British-era system, where power was concentrated in the hands of a few. The old British Indian Civil Service was replaced by a new Indianized system: the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Police Service, and the Indian Foreign Service. One of the biggest supporters of civil services in independent India was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. He believed that a strong and independent civil service was crucial for India's unity and governance. He called civil servants the steel frame of India, a backbone that would hold the country together, maintain law and order, and drive development. Under his leadership, the civil services were restructured. Officers were no longer just colonial rulers, they became public servants working for the people. With the foundation of UPSC set, the first official UPSC exam for the new services was conducted in 1951. Thousands of young Indians now had the chance to serve their country on merit, not privilege. This was a game changer. No longer was the civil service an elite club for the British. Now, it was an opportunity for any Indian, regardless of background, to rise and serve the nation. As India grew, so did UPSC. More services were added, the exam pattern evolved, and lakhs of aspirants started applying every year. What started at a small initiative in 1950 became one of the toughest and most prestigious exams in the world. But how did the exam change over time? And why is UPSC considered the ultimate test of patience and intelligence today? Let's find out in the next section. Today, the Union Public Service Commission is more than just an exam. It's a dream for millions. Every year, over 10 lakh aspirants apply, but only a few hundred make it to the final list. With a success rate of less than 1%, UPSC is not just an academic test, it's a battle of patience, strategy, and mental endurance. The modern-day UPSC exam is divided into 3 stages. First, the prelims, a highly competitive screening round with general studies and CSAT papers. Then comes the mains, where aspirants must write 9 lengthy papers testing their knowledge, analytical skills, and writing ability. And finally, the toughest stage as considered, the interview, or to rightfully say it as the personality test. Here, officers are selected not just for their intelligence, but for their leadership, decision-making ability, and confidence. Only the best make it through, and those who do go on to serve as IAS, IPS, IFS, and other Group A officers, shaping India's policies and governance. But preparing for UPSC isn't easy. Candidates face several challenges, including the sheer competition. Only 1 out of 1,000 candidates gets selected. With such high stakes, The pressure toll is immense. On average, aspirants spend 2 to 3 years preparing for UPSC. Many have to sacrifice jobs, social lives, and thus with that comes a lot of sacrifice in financial stability too. UPSC constantly updates its syllabus and pattern, making preparation unpredictable. In that sense, what might have worked out yesterday might not be working out today. Should you join an expensive coaching institute or rely on self-study, many aspirants do struggle to find the right strategy. Thus, the long preparation, failures, and social pressure take a toll on mental health. Many aspirants deal with stress, anxiety, and self-doubt. While UPSC is seen as the gold standard of recruitment, it has its fair share of criticism. Many argue that the exam is too rigid and outdated, focusing more on rote memorization rather than practical skills. There are also concerns about accessibility. Many rural candidates struggle due to lack of resources, coaching, and digital access. And while things are improving, there is still a gender gap in civil services, with fewer women reaching top administrative positions. So what's next for UPSC? As India moves forward, there are talks about possible reforms. Experts suggest shifting from memory-based exams to a more skill-based selection process. More digital resources and exam centers could help students from rural areas complete on an equal footing. With technology evolving, some suggest using AI-driven assessments to improve transparency and efficiency. One thing is clear, UPSC will continue to evolve just as India does, but no matter the change, one thing will always remain. UPSC will keep selecting the best minds to lead the nation. From its colonial roots under British rule to becoming the backbone of India's administration, the journey of UPSC has been nothing short of remarkable. Every year, lakhs of aspirants dedicate years of hard work, hoping to serve the nation as civil servants, but the road is tough, filled with challenges, failures, and sacrifice. Yet, those who make it through become the leaders, policy makers, and change makers, shaping India's future. Whether it's ensuring law and order, driving economic policies, or representing India on the global stage, UPSC officers are everywhere, making a real difference. Names like Kiran Bedi, Armstrong Pame, E. Sridharan, and T.N. Shishan reminds us of how UPSC has produced some of India's greatest administrators. But the big question remains, is UPSC still the best way to select India's leaders, or does it need reforms? Some argue it's the fairest exam in India, selecting officers purely on merit. Others feel it's too rigid and outdated, favoring those with resources. We want to hear from you. Should UPSC be reformed, or is it perfect as it is? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video and want more such content on history, governance, and career guidance, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into India's most important institutions.